It's really common for avoidant people to be demonized. Often in society, we portray most men as being avoidant, and that's actually not true. It's a safety and distance. That's what avoidance is. And at the base of all this, one of the big problems that avoidant men experience is a lack of. How does this affect relationships? Shallow connections, sexual avoidance, sabotage. Avoidant people self-sabotage relationships. People who are avoidant can often be very charismatic and they can be very fun in a very light-hearted and easy way. And that's their way of avoiding emotional depth as well. Saying, I love you, I care about you, I want to be with you. All these things can be a struggle for avoidant man. Don't just continue in this painful way of being. Don't just keep kicking it down the road and going, I'll do it later, because later becomes never. Now, what can you do about it? I see it as like a 3-step thing. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. I haven't said that for a long time. I'm doing a solo episode, a full-length solo episode. As you notice, I do these shorter solo episodes on the weekends, but this is a longer one. I'm going to dive into avoidant attachment, right? If you're listening to this and you've ever had this experience of feeling kind of uncomfortable when people get too close to you, whether that's emotionally or physically or in a relationship sense, maybe it could be friends or family or even lovers, right? Or you kind of crave connection, but you feel quite afraid, right? You find yourself pulling away. You probably, most likely, are dealing with avoidant attachment or some flavor of it, right? So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about what is avoidant attachment, right? Why and how it happens, right? Some of the common avoidant behaviors, how it affects relationships, intimacy, and dating, and then how we can heal that. A 3-step plan, the 3-step plan I use with my clients, right? So what I'm also going to say at the beginning now is that I've got a program coming up called Breaking the Chains of Avoidance, and it is only for avoidant men, right? Avoidantly attached men, to help them go from this, what I've described there, like this uncomfortability with connecting, fear of commitment, and all these things that kind of are the hallmarks, right, of avoidant attachment and just ruin relationships, to being able to create secure, deep and meaningful relationships. This is the second cohort I'm taking this through. The first time I did this, men got into relationships. They loved more openly. They connected more deeply with their partners. They reduced the amount of arguments and disagreements in their relationship. They had deeper sex and intimacy, right? So it's a really beautiful and groundbreaking program. It's a 3-month program and it starts on the 22nd of April, and there's limited spaces because I want to keep the groups small enough so that everyone has a good connection with each other. So if this is something you're interested in, there is a wait list down below. Add yourself to that and you get a special discount for being on the wait list. So if you leave it until the 21st of April, A, there may not be any spaces, and B, you're going to be paying more money for it, right? So that's my plug done, right? Wait list, description. Yeah, show notes, description, whatever you want to call that, right? So there's 4 attachment styles, right? There's 3 main ones that we generally talk about, right? Secure, which is like the kind of goal, which is like comfortable with relationships, comfortable with connection, have good boundaries. Then there is anxious. Those people often are really wanting love. They maybe, I would say, over-index on relationships. They have a preoccupation with relationships and love and being in relationships. Then we have avoidant, or just dismissive avoidance is often called. And these are people who are dismissive of relationships and connection. They're like, not that important, right? That might be you. Or they seem dismissive, but there's a lot of fear and anxiety and worry underneath that, right? But there's generally come across as, just like me, I'm dismissive avoidant. It's like, I'm not sure about this. Is this worth it? You know, there's a kind of apathy towards relationships. And there's a disorganized. And disorganized people have a kind of mix of all of them, right? A mix of avoidant and anxious in there. So they want relationships. For example, I've got clients who are disorganized and they like really want a relationship. They get in it and then they're suddenly like, I don't know if this is right for me. They feel really anxious. They feel really fearful. And it's just this kind of mix of the two things. But I'm going to focus on dismissive avoidant, of what was commonly known as avoidant attachment, right? And it's a relational style, right, that is really the hallmark of struggles of emotional closeness, vulnerability, dependence and reliance on other people, as well as, like I said, the emotional pieces. But there's this thing around closeness, right? There's a desire for independence, because for avoidant people, independence feels safe, right? And the opposite of independence is dependence, right? Whereas interdependence, which is the goal we want to get to, which I'll probably talk about later, is where we want to get to, right? But there's this strong preference for independence because it feels safe. There's an uncomfortability with emotional intimacy, and there's often like a suppression of emotions in general, right? There's this kind of pushing down of emotions. And I often talk about avoidant men because I think often in society we portray most men as being avoidant, and that's actually not true. There's a slight higher number of men that are avoidant than women that are avoidant, right? And that's much to do with the socialization of men around masculinity and the man box, things I've talked about in my podcast before. So what do they do, right? It's this distancing, right? It's this distance. It's a safety in distance. That's what avoidance is. The name is pretty apt, right? It's a safety in distance. It's often that you might feel as an avoidant person, you're like, I'm not the relationship type of person. I was like this. Man, I didn't believe I could have a loving, connecting relationship. I really didn't believe that for a long time. You know, if you speak to some of my friends, they'll tell you that at points I had just given up on relationships. And now I'm in a, you know, me and Orsa together 5 going on 6 years. We've just had our son born, Bjorn, which I think is one of the ultimate commitments I've ever put my mind to, which actually threw up a lot of fear for me, which I'll probably talk about again later on. And I was avoidant, you know, and I start to work on that and learn about that. But I believe for many years I wouldn't have the very thing I have now, I didn't believe I would have it, right? If you'd asked me maybe 12, 13 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it, right? And it's really common for avoidant people to be demonized. I think often, and you're going to get to understand the deeper workings of avoidant people, because I think we often demonize avoidant people in public as like being cruel and evil and so forth without understanding their behavior, right? I did a little reel about this, which will come out in a few days, is around how we often look at other people's behavior and we filter that through, like, if I was doing that, what would that mean? So like, say for instance, we are in a relationship with an avoidant person and they are not wanting to have any physical contact, or they don't want to discuss the relationship, right? We filter that through ourselves and go, oh, well, if I did that, that would mean the relationship is meaningless to me, or that I hate my partner, or I think my partner's a piece of shit, or whatever, right? And then we react to them in that way, because we're not necessarily looking at the deeper piece of like, who is this avoidant person? What's going on for them and how they feel in these moments? So it's important to also add in a little bit of research I got here. Let me just read my little notes here. 25% of the population has avoidant attachment. 25% of the population, that's a lot of people, right? And generally what happens is avoidant people and anxious people are drawn to each other, right? They're drawn to each other because they have traits in each other that deeply and unconsciously they want. You know, for instance, anxious people are very comfortable and open to express their emotions and feelings, right? Avoidant people really struggle with that. But deep down below in the unconscious of the mind, there's a part of the avoidant person that wants to be able to touch and feel their emotions and express them, right? But doesn't feel safe. So being with an anxious person allows them in a very weird way to experience emotions, even if they're not those, even though the avoidant person pushes those emotions away, finds them uncomfortable, and so forth. There's part of our minds, a part of our being, our nervous system, that's trying to get us to heal by being in a relationship and close to the very things that we need, right? And that sounds really crazy, but there's a wonderful book called Getting the Love You Want that talks more about this, and I think it's spot on. My belief is that often we are drawn to things unconsciously which create resistance in us, that create discomfort in us, so that we can heal that discomfort, that resistance, and expand and grow and self-actualize into more, right? That's my little take on it. And that's why when I see for myself and my clients, when they're drawn to something and they're like, oh my God, this is causing me pain, I often ask, what's on the other side of the pain for you? And often they'll come and be like, oh, actually, this could be freedom. It could be like deep connection, whatever. And they're like, great, let's go through, not avoid, let's go through. So why and how does avoidant attachment happen? You know, like most things, most of our problems, it starts in childhood. Yeah. Often it comes through this inconsistency in emotional support, right? Which is a kind of common one, where we have caretakers who maybe minimize emotions and feelings, or maybe they react very negatively when we have feelings, right? Or very neutrally, right? So if we express emotion like a desire or a need or sadness, we could be met with, oh, you know, what's wrong with you? Like, you don't need that thing. Or we could be met with hostility. Like maybe we got shouted at or criticized or something like that. Or, and I say this to the people who are listening to this who are like, oh, but my childhood was good, because I get that a lot with people. It may just be a few instances in childhood where you took on this belief that emotions were unsafe, for instance, right? Or that independence is safer than having to rely on other people. It literally could come down to something that came up for me recently in a somatic experiencing therapy session, was that my mum would often work till late, and she'd have to pick me up from school, so she wouldn't pick me up until maybe 5, 6 o'clock. Right. And this happened. She was a social worker, so she could sometimes be working even later. So I'd be the last person in the playground at, from the age of maybe 10, maybe even earlier, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. So I would be left alone, and I started to see that I create this narrative of like, don't depend on anybody. Out of that, and then some other instances, but it's just like, I'm going to be left alone. I'm going to be neglected, right? Because little old David at 9 years old, even though he knew his mum was working, what he experienced was the emotional experience of neglect, right? Because you don't have the emotional capacity on understanding or intelligence to really reason with what's happening, right? And we often bring that same lack of emotional capacity into life, right? And we don't reason very well when we get emotional. So there's this emotional piece that's often missing for people who are avoidant, like how it happens. We may have parents who are avoidant as well. Like my dad's highly avoidant, for instance, and I think we mirror some of those things, especially when boys to boys. One of the things I also see is divorce. Quite a lot of people I've worked with where their parents got divorced, usually between the age of kind of 11 to 15. Or at least they saw the relationship crumbling at that point, and they saw one of their parents or both of their parents really unhappy. Like maybe they saw the mother who was really miserable and was taken advantage of or hurt or something like that. Or they saw the father, really miserable in relationship, right? Some of my clients have even told me where one of their parents has told them like, never get married, getting married makes you unhappy, right? Getting married makes you miserable. Or they see, like I said, they see their mother or father in so much pain, and then they equate it to like, oh, they're in pain because they're with my mother or they're with, with someone else. For me, I saw my mum get remarried when I was about, how old was I? I think I was about 9 or 10. And I saw that her relationship wasn't happy. It wasn't good. It didn't land as good to me, right? It wasn't pleasing for me to be in as a young boy. And I saw that as like, marriage is bad. Or what I really took away from that was like, oh, you need to be really, really careful about who you get in the relationship with, plus who you have children with. That's probably the two big things that I took. So that made me quite avoidant of relationships, because it's like, oh, I need to be 100% sure this person's right before I'm in a relationship, because I could have kids and that could ruin my life. Yeah. So sometimes people feel this experience of young people, childhood, right, where the emotions are ridiculed, or we see the pain in our parents, or we see signs that relationships are bad. Maybe you around you don't see anyone who's in a happy relationship, right, or was a happy relationship. Like you never saw a mum and a dad together happy. That's something that also experience I had as well. So an important thing to say at this point is that avoidant attachment isn't just this choice. Yeah. It isn't just like a psychological pattern, right? It isn't just something someone chooses to be in the moment. They don't just choose to be avoidant and just do that to you out of malicious. It is a deeply ingrained nervous system response. You could argue this is a type of nervous system wounding, or even a level of trauma, right? With a very small t, right? It's a type of nervous system. So it's burnt into the very wiring of our bodies and minds. So it's to put this more, our nervous system is reacting to everything before our brain has the time to kind of cognitively think about it, right? It's working with our emotional centers to respond to danger, respond to what's happening, right? And that's a really important thing to know, because it's often we get frustrated with our partners, whether they're anxious or avoidant, right? And we're just like, why can't they just do different? Why can't they just be different? But it's important to remember this. It's like, this is almost automatic for them. It's a deep emotional responses that have been happening for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and it's to have that level of compassion with also boundaries. This is a really important piece in there. Yeah. So not just to be like, oh, they just need to change, right? is to understand that avoidant individuals, dismissive avoidant individuals are wired, right? They are wired to move away from relationships and love and connection because their nervous system has taught them that intimacy, right, and reliance, right, are a threat to their safety, right? A threat to their physical, emotional, and psychological safety, right? They experience the kind of flight response, right, which is a flee response. If you saw a lion in the bushes, which no one's really seeing lion in the bushes anymore. If you listen to this, you're probably not seeing any lions in any bushes. But if you saw a lion in the bush, you would go into a number of kind of nervous system responses. Fight, which is you're going to fight the lion. Flight, which is you're going to get the fuck away from the lion. Freeze, you almost like freeze and like hope the lion doesn't notice you at all. Or fawn, which is in some way try and appease the lion, right? Though that last one is probably unlikely to happen unless, well, that could happen, right? But these happen in various parts of our lives, right? You might have a presentation to do at work, right? You have the presentation for 500 people or 100 people, 20 people, whatever. And you find yourself wanting to like not do it. Or you find yourself, and that's flight. Or you might find yourself agitated and angry almost that you have to do it. Like, how dare your boss ask you to do it? Fight, right? And fawn, which is the kind of appeasing one, that might be your boss asks you to do it and you're like, oh yeah, this is great, yeah, but you don't really want to do it. You're just appeasing the people, right? This is the thing. It's not a decision you make like with the presentation or like when you have to go on a date or when you have to go for a job interview. I'm just thinking of the times when these nervous system responses kick in, right? And we feel them very viscerally in the body. Right? And I think that's something we don't often think about for avoidant people is that they experience very, very, and I know this from my past, previous and present experience of connection, feeling like, oh, this is going to be dangerous. And then the feeling gets translated into thoughts and stories and so forth. So common behaviors, right? So maybe you're listening to this and this is you. Common behaviors of avoidant attachment. Maybe this is you, maybe this is the partner you're listening for, or a friend or whatever, right? Fear of vulnerability. So this is the emotional piece. It's like emotions are seen as dangerous. Vulnerability is seen that you're going to be experience like some level of threat and hurt. And this can come from just that, you were open and vulnerable as a young man or young boy of your parents and you were ridiculed or laughed at, right? We've all had, like every man, every boy especially, has really had a deep experience of that. If you're a man listening to this, I could probably say to you, when do you remember your vulnerability, your emotions being ridiculed or bullied? And every man will give you a story, every single one. And this is a lot to do with, the man box, as I've talked about in previous episodes. Those rules that we have to live by as men that makes this live in this really small box. Then there's this kind of hyper-independence. Yeah, that's another kind of hallmark, hyper-independence. And it's a trauma response, right? It's a trauma wounding response. We view reliance as weakness, we almost like, we look at babies and we're like, I never want to go back there. That's the thing I see for a lot of avoidant men is like, they just were like so scared to be vulnerable and dependent on someone because the deep ingrained experience that's burnt into the nervous system is of being let down, by those who should be able to care for them. And I think this is such an important piece because as much as, you might be very angry with your avoidant partner or you might feel angry at yourself, right, for your hyper-independence sometimes because it's ruining relationships, you've got to have some compassion for where it's come from. This is a really important part of the healing, which we'll talk about later on, is having a level of compassion. Like, God, where did this come from? This started out as this little boy, a little girl who was neglected in some way or has the experience of being neglected or not cared for, not looked after, not appreciated, right? And I think it's just important to understand where that's come from, right? Have compassion for yourself, not just endlessly being compassionate and just like, oh, compassion, I don't need to do anything because I'm being compassionate. There's levels to get into action and change. I think the ultimate compassion for ourselves is actually guiding ourselves to kind of compassionate change in particular areas. Another piece about the common traits, and this is one I felt very deeply in my life, was commitment aversion and uncomfortability of long-term relationships, right? And always looking for a kind of exit strategy. This is, for me, this comes from this fear of being truly seen and then not being seen as good enough. Because the avoidant man's fear is, if I am in a relationship and I allow myself to be open and be seen by a partner, and they see all of me, and they won't accept me because I'm not good enough. That's a core dysfunctional belief for a lot of avoidant people, a lot of avoidant men, is I am not good enough. There's something intrinsically wrong with me, right? This is one of my beliefs that I often attending with, is like not being good enough. So we're not good enough for a relationship, right? A lot of avoidant men I speak to, they often, when you get into the deeper work, the shadow work, the inner child stuff, there's a deep belief that they are not worthy of love. They're not worthy of a loving relationship, right? So this creates this commitment aversion, which is interesting because the anxious people, their belief is like, I'm not worthy of love, but they deal with it differently. They deal with it in the complete opposite way. Instead of running away from love, they run towards it, and which can land for avoidant people, especially, as feeling clingy, as feeling always wanting to be in a relationship and so forth. And that's why that push-pull dance that happens between anxious and avoidant people, because, there's that piece where they're in a relationship, one's hot, one's cold, they're moving towards each other and so forth. But this commitment aversion for me ran so many levels deep. It was, from having her leave a toothbrush at my house to leaving clothes at my house. I literally would feel like this anxiety and stress in my body. Like, I had not even ex-partners, women I was dating, they would leave stuff and I'd be like, what the fuck has she left this for? Like, this needs to get out of my house. I remember once messaging the girl as she left maybe 5-10 minutes earlier. I was like, hey, you left this thing. Do you want me to bring it down to you, the station? I'll get there by the time you get there, because it was so uncomfortable for me to see this toothbrush, for example, in my bathroom, because of the meaning that I would give it. That's a really important part. The meaning that you give the object, like, oh, there's a toothbrush here. God, she left a toothbrush. That means she's definitely coming back. That means she's probably thinking, we're together, we're going to get in a relationship and blah, blah, blah. And then you feel all the stress of the emotions, right? And then it went all the way up for me, was moving through the levels of relationship to having a baby, because to me, that's the ultimate commitment to somebody, because of my childhood of, my mum being a single parent and raising us, seeing the importance of who you choose to have a child with. So for me, I had to do a lot of work around commitment and having a child and being a father, because of the fears that I had that came up, in 2023, when we really started seriously talking about when we're going to start trying for a baby. So the commitment has many layers to it. It's not just getting into a relationship. It can be leaving stuff. It can be getting into a relationship, moving in together, organizing dates even. It can be organizing holidays, planning for the future. This is where this commitment aversion comes up. And the commitment aversion is related to the next point, which is around feeling trapped. Often, for avoidant people, the emotional closeness makes them feel trapped, right? Relationships make them feel trapped because they don't feel free to just make any decision they want about themselves whenever they want. And there's this fear of, like, if I'm in a relationship, I'm going to be told what to do. And I think there's a lot of dependence in that as well, right? Really important to understand. Avoidant people have another thing as well, another common behavior is around this rejection sensitivity. And it's often actually really interesting because you don't necessarily notice it, because a lot of avoidant people often seem very confident and very outgoing and very, charismatic even. Not all, but many of them do, right? Because avoidant people, they often do very well in the corporate world, right? Because the corporate world is very logical, which often the avoidant people do. They can be very logical and head-based, very unembodied, disembodied, out of their bodies. They don't breathe deeply. They couldn't tell you what it feels like to be, feel the depths of their bodies, some parts of themselves, feeling their heart and things like that. They're very much in the head, right? So they do very well in the corporate world because it's all about logic. It's all about targets and it's all about goals. That's the kind of like achiever, dismissive avoidant who does very well in those ways, right? But underneath it all, they can be really sensitive to rejection. Because rejection is this kind of fear, isn't it? Because it's this existential meeting of the thing that they don't want to be true, which is, if they experience rejection, is confirmation of what? They're not good enough, right? So there's this sensitivity to rejection, A, to experiencing it, and B, to situations where it might happen. So this can be relationships, for instance, where if an avoidant person believes that they want to date with someone and the person doesn't like them, or doesn't like them that much, they may ghost. They may just like not make any attempt to send a message, because in that moment to send that message puts them in this a really vulnerable position. if I send this message to this person, they may not reply, then I'm going to feel rejection. So the best way to deal with that in their minds, not all of them, but many of them, is to not send that message initially and just wait to see if the other person does. And the problem with this is they'll experience this feeling of being rejected, especially in our dating culture, where we still expect men to lead the dating charge and women to be responsive. Because he won't send the message to the woman. The woman might be waiting for him to send that message. She doesn't send that message because she's like, he should send that message, and then he feels rejected. He feels like and what's happened there is he's rejected himself. The rejection sensitivity creates the rejection themselves, right? This is something really common we see. Like, we create a lot of our pain. The next common behavior is this hot and cold. This oscillating between wanting closeness and intimacy. So that might be wanting to hang out, meet up, texting, messaging, having sex, being close. And then this withdrawal, right? And the withdrawal part is what it is like they feel the urge to, like, I want to be close to this person. And, you know, they do something, they organize a date. I'll talk about myself here. I didn't struggle with this so much in the early days of dating, for example. I lean in, you know, organize dates, have fun, have great sex, hang out a few times. And then suddenly I'd be like, oh shit, we haven't had that conversation about, I don't want anything serious. Oh shit. And I start worrying about it, start getting in my head about it. So then I kind of withdraw unconsciously often. Like, I'm not messaging back as quickly because, you know, I don't want to send the wrongs. I don't want to give mixed signals. It's something I hear from avoidant men a lot. I don't want to send mixed signals. But one of the common traits also is not communicating clearly, right? So it's like in this piece about the hot and cold and not communicating is, oh, I would withdraw because I'd be like, oh, I don't want to send the mixed signals, but I wouldn't communicate in that moment. But I learned to later on, like, hey, this is moving too fast for me, or I don't want anything serious, right? This is still avoidance. It's just a better version of avoidance. I learned to be a highly trained avoidant in my kind of heyday, shall I say? Not so heyday, but in my younger years, my early 30s and late 20s and early 30s. So they might pull away because of the fears of being trapped, the fear of commitment and all these things, because they might be thinking, oh my God, if I've seen this woman 5 or 6 times, she's going to expect me to be in a relationship. And maybe she thinks we're in a relationship. Shit, she said something that made me think we're in a relationship, and I don't think we're in a relationship, and they're panicking and wanting to move out. And all this happens under this cool, calm persona. You know, I'd be having this panic sometimes in the comfort of my own front room. You know, and I see it with my clients when we have conversations. They're stressed, they're panicking, and then when I take them to the body and notice what they're feeling, they're like, oh my God, I'm really like anxious, I'm really worried, I'm really afraid. And they don't have a way to shift this, right? They don't, because they're not in their body enough to notice. They just notice the thoughts. They don't notice how their nervous system state is. And this is a very important part of the healing work. So, as we talked about this one, it's emotional suppression, which is a very common hallmark of common behavior, but there's emotional suppression of their feelings and other people's feelings. And it leads to a detachment, like an emotional detachment. So they will want to detach from their own feelings, avoidant people. Avoidant men want to detach from their own feelings, but also other people's feelings, which leads to like pushing away deep conversation, procrastination around kind of emotional commitments, often using work, hobbies, gym, which I guess is a hobby, work, gym, hobbies, and other things as an excuse to avoid like connection and emotions. I'd be like, oh, I'm too busy, I'm working loads, I can't have that important conversation about where this relationship is going, right? But it's all this stuff is this way to avoid the fear and a way to avoid this feeling of not being good enough, right? And again, this emotional suppression also comes in why avoidant people will avoid kind of conflict or deeper conversations with their partners, right? Because they're trying to avoid the uncomfortable feelings, the uncomfortable and intense feelings. Because avoidant people's emotional capacity is stunted, I think is a good word to use, right? It never grew into what it needs to be like a really whole adult. They're often operating on a kind of operating system of emotions that's like a 10, 11, 12-year-old, right? And not to say that, you know, any of the other attachment styles are necessarily particularly better, right? You know, they just have a different flavor in them. Like, you know, we look at anxious people and they're overly emotional. They are reacting to their emotions constantly, creating stories and emotionally reacting to those and taking external action often on those. So it's not necessarily a better way to be. I think often with the attachment styles, I feel through my internet usage, I often feel that anxious people act as if they are better than avoidance. And I think that's a really unhelpful way of speaking about it, because it lacks compassion and understanding for the depth and understanding and the fear that goes on. But that's a little side piece. Sabotage. Important one. Sabotage. Self-sabotage. Avoiding people self-sabotage relationships. Cheating is a form of self-sabotage. And also it's a form of avoidance of commitment. But it's particularly a self-sabotage tool, right? Because when we cheat, a few things happen. Someone cheats, men cheat, avoidant men cheat. They will cheat. They'll feel shit about themselves, right? Which feeds into the narrative, I'm not good enough. I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. The narrative in the mind is like, there's something wrong with me. Why did I do that? I shouldn't have done that. We all kind of know cheating isn't good. We might externally pretend, sometimes men do, but I've been in groups of men, whether that's men's groups, men's circles, or just groups of friends, and talked about like the feeling of going back to their partner after they've cheated and looking them in the eye, right? And they feel like shit. And this feeds into the not good enough belief. And you see how that's sabotage, self-sabotage? I've done something that's sabotaging the connection and relationship I have, right? And that's kind of maybe at one of the stronger ends. Some of the other ways to sabotage can be taking really long to reply to messages. I'm really guilty of that across the board in my life. I feel kind of overwhelmed often with messages, still to this day. So the downside of running a business when you've got lots of things to deal with. Forgetting dates, important dates like anniversaries and birthdays and stuff like that. Procrastination on anything that kind of is a relationship task or moving things forward. Yeah. This unconscious sabotage, like the mind is uncomfortable with the action, right? It creates emotion. So what do we do with things that we find uncomfortable? We almost always move away from them. Yeah. We move away from pain and we move towards pleasure, right? And they found that the moving away from pain is 4 times as powerful in a human being than moving towards pleasure, right? So we're often just moving away from pain. That's a human condition. And for avoidant people, they see emotions and the things that are emotional as uncomfortable and commitment related as uncomfortable. Another thing you see commonly with avoidant people is a shifting of environments. Like they might go through lots of jobs. They might go through lots of different partners. They may change cities and move a lot. I'll give you an example from my life. A combination of my fear of commitment, my avoidance of commitment was I didn't have a full-time job. I had a full-time job, but I was a contractor for about 8 years. And it's the ultimate avoidant thing to do. I am not committed to any job. Like I go there, I work, I do the job, I leave. I don't have to do appraisals. I don't have to do all the emotional stuff of work. I don't have to really do all the smoozing of bosses. I don't have to think about climbing the ladder and promotions. I didn't even have to think about friendship and actually liking people. I went, I did a good job, and I got out every day. And that's an avoidant thing to do in work, is this kind of like shutting off the emotional, the relational aspect of work, right? Or the changing of environments, like wanting to be in different places, because then you can keep it surface level, right? You don't have to go too deep. You can keep it surface level if you're switching from place to place or conversation to conversation, from topic to topic. That's what makes avoidant people really charismatic, is this ability to switch from topic to topic to topic, right? Especially in the early stage of dating, or even when you just meet someone, because then, you feel like you've talked about a lot of different things, but actually you've never gone deep on anything. Like you've never gone deep into a thing. I've talked a little about emotions and over-intellectualizing. That's something we do as avoidant people. We think our emotions. We think our way through them. It's a really prime example of this is if I say to an avoidant man often, like, how are you feeling? And then they'll give me a thought. Yeah, they'll give me a thought. I am feeling like what I need to do is go to the shop. That's not emotion. That's a thought of what you should do. Yeah. It's a really common thing that I find with avoidant men when I talk to them about their emotions. It's why I use the emotional will so much, to get them into the feeling. And then I ask them, what does that feeling feel like in the body? And we get into that piece, and it can feel quite uncomfortable. It's a kind of somatic work they need to do. And then there's some of the last pieces about emotional numbing. It's very common for avoidant men to emotionally numb and dissociate, through, it can be drugs, drink, alcohol. My preference was weed many years ago, but also just through like daydreaming and so forth. It's a way that they kind of disconnect. This next piece I'm going to talk about is still kind of a habit of avoiding people, but it's more of an internal habit, right? Which is overthinking relationships. And it's this kind of like hidden feature of avoidant people, because no one sees this. As an avoidant man, I spent so much time worrying and in anxiety, really what we call anxiety, about relationships that I was in or not in, right? Thinking back to past relationships, this phantom ex thing, right, that I see a lot of men do, is like they're thinking about this ex, like, oh, I wish I'd done that differently, and oh, maybe I should get back with them, and all this. It's this thinking about relationships and the aspects of relationships and how they show up in relationships. But it doesn't look that way, right? If you thought about an avoidant person, you wouldn't think they're thinking about relationships. You think they're thinking about everything else, but actually they are thinking about relationships. And another piece that I see, actually thinking about it now, and a really common thing for avoidant men is this fault finding. I think I've definitely done a short episode about this fault finding, is looking for flaws in potential partners. This very negative bias towards relationships and partners. So looking for some sort of problem or fault. It's this unconscious thing. It's like, let me find a fault with them and hone in on that, some quirk, some way they eat food or the way they walk or things they wear or whatever. And then I can put all my attention, all happening unconsciously, on this thing. And then that's a signal that this relationship is wrong. Yeah? It's a really, really common thing. And at the base of all this, one of the big problems that avoidant men experience, right, is a lack of self-trust. They don't trust themselves, right? They don't trust themselves, especially around emotional things, especially around relationship things. They have no self-trust. And I think this can be quite common for all people in the insecure attachment, which is the avoidant, anxious and disorganized. It's lack of self-trust. It's lack of actually like feeling decisive in life often, but particularly in relational and emotional topics, right? It's always like looking for answers outside themselves, looking for evidence of. I see this so much in avoidant men. It's this lack of self-trust. So how does this affect relationships, right? We've talked about this a fair bit. Mind me pouring my water. We talked about this a fair bit. How does it affect our relationships? And some of the stuff I've already talked about is quite obvious. Shallow connections. Yeah? Shallow connections. If you can't go emotionally deep with people, if you're not willing to do that, then you're going to have shallow relationships and continually have shallow relationships, right? That's going to be your experience, because you're going to jump out when they get deep. You're going to constantly want to try and avoid conflict. Yeah, you're going to avoid conflict like the plague, because you don't want conflict. You want to run away from it, because conflict has all these emotions that you can't handle. Conflict makes you feel overwhelmed, right? Conflict makes you shut down and disengage, right? This is something that's really important. As an avoidant man, you're going to have conflict and you're going to go, fuck this, I want to get the fuck out. It's like there's a lion in the room, but yeah? That's the experience you're having. There's conflict. There's a lion in this room. I need to get the fuck out of here. I need to go somewhere else. And I need to like go for a walk. Usually you want to be on your own. You're going to want to be on your own. For some of you, it's going to be things like masturbation and porn and smoke some weed or go for a run or whatever it is, right? You want to go and do something that makes you feel good alone. Really important, right? Makes you feel good alone. And this conflict avoidance and the way of dealing with conflict flies in the face of how the anxious person deals with conflict, because anxious people want to deal with conflict right away. They want to talk about it because they don't feel okay if it's not dealt with. So they want to go into the emotions and feelings and talk about it right now, right? And they need to co-regulate, which is come together and feel calm together, which is the opposite of the avoidant person, right? This is what creates these anxious avoidant dynamics, which I often talk about on Instagram, on my feed. Look for any of the posts that kind of start with dynamic, talking about dynamics or anxious avoidant or the cycles. And this is what happens, this withdrawal and so forth, because the conflict feels so dangerous to avoidant people. It feels like a threat. And again, it's not a conscious choice. It's not a conscious choice. It's this emotional, it's this nervous system response. If the body tightens up, they feel shut down, they feel closed, their head will go down, they won't look at you, they'll look around the room because they feel shit. They feel terrible in the conflict. They can't find words, right? This still happens to me. It's like I'm in conflict with Orsa and I'm like, I don't know what to say. I just want to run away and I just want to be on my laptop and work. Yeah. For me, work is where I go. Having my hydration drink there. So for those of you that can't see, I poured some water, put a hydration tablet in there. So there is this avoidance of conflict. And remember, conflict can come in all sorts of ways, like, relationships, life, friends, family, all these things. Or the potential for conflict is everywhere, because that's also an important piece. The programming is for the potential of these things, not necessarily for the actual happening. So it's like when we start getting avoidant, we want to avoid conflict. So how do we avoid conflict? We don't bring up the things that we need to talk about. We don't bring up, our needs. We don't talk about the things that are upsetting us because they lead to conflict. And then what happens? By avoiding the conflict, we create a bigger conflict later on, right? Because we've shut down or we've not talked about the things that need to be talked about, which creates bigger emotions that we can't handle, which reinforces the idea that we should avoid conflict. Yeah, really important. You see these cycles of things happen. It's just vicious. It's vicious. If you don't do anything about it, it just goes on for years. Like, it's vicious. Like, I look at some people in my family and they're avoiding. They're in their 70s, right? Ain't changed. I meet men sometimes and they're like 55 and they've been in this cycle of avoidance their whole life. They've been through 2-3 marriages and it hasn't changed, right? You got 4 or 5 kids, 3 different women, and they're seeing it in their kids and they're avoidant towards their children and their emotions, and they're going to create avoidant children because of that. That's one of the things that really spurred me, as a side note, spurred me to make a change, was that I didn't want my kids to experience what I had experienced and to feel like I did about relationships. So I was like, I need to do this for them. I need to make this change for them. And it's important to remember when it comes to conflicts, avoidant people don't experience conflict as like, oh, we can have this conflict and then we can be really happy together. No, they experience conflict as like, this is going to be horrible. This is going to be painful. They don't see the rainbow on the other side, because often in their homes, avoidant people didn't see repair. The sad thing is really common. A lot of us don't see repair between our parents, but avoidant people didn't see repair and kind of coming back together, not the happy ever after, but like the makeup. So they don't have an embodied experience. The nervous systems don't know what it feels like to have repair that feels good. So it takes a lot of work with them to do that, to like taking them through that sort of work. For avoidant men, there's this underlying loneliness as well, right? In relationship, feeling lonely in the relationship, fighting for independence constantly, for this kind of like being free. Man, me also have some jokes about my freedom desiring things, but there's always this feeling of loneliness inside the relationship, often feeling misunderstood and not known, right? And that struggle for deep connection, because we are creating, avoidant men are creating this loneliness in themselves. And I think it's exacerbated in the world we live in now, where everything's online, like dating's online, friendships are online, all these things are online, that there's these weak connections often that don't have much depth to them. So it's very easy to live in that, And then, we look at loneliness in men, and the struggles with friendship, and it's deeply connected to attachment styles in my eyes. The struggle to make friends and keep connections and maintain connections through, communication, regular communication, sending messages, asking someone how they're doing, asking them how their job interview went, all those things that help create connection and keep connection going. Avoidant men often will forget about, or they under-index the importance of them, right? They under-index how important those things are. So they just forget them and leave them, right? And this damages their romantic relations, but also their friendships. So, this is a really toxic trait, this next trait in relationship we're going to talk about for avoidant men, right? Which is this kind of self-justifying behavior of like, I'm not the problem. You're the problem. You need to change. And if you stop being emotional, you stop being needy, right? And I say this because I laugh a bit, because I can definitely see where I was like this for many years. Is like, if you change, everything's going to be fine. It's like pushing the problem away. right? Because if an avoidant man has to realize that he is part of the problem, he's not 100% the problem, but part of the problem, then he has to also have to feel the shame of what? Feeling not good enough, right? Because if I'm the problem, I'm not good enough. That's what often we come to, not consciously, but there's like this unconscious, semi-conscious part of our brains that's thinking this, right? So we want to push shame away, right? And I'm not saying this is just avoidant people, because I think the same thing happens with anxious people as well, and disorganized people. We struggle with, the whole thing of like, we've caused people pain, because once we acknowledge we've caused people pain, we're part of the problem, right? So we want to move away from that. So it can be that avoidant people in relation can be quite belligerent in that pointing out flaws in their partners, right? And telling them. But also leads to kind of a lack of accountability in conflict, a dismissal of their partner's emotional needs, which is linked to their uncomfortability with emotions. And also, like I said, seeing our partners as needy and too emotional. You need too much. You're the problem. You need to change your expectations. But the problem with this reinforces the mindset of avoidance, like avoidance being the way we should be. And it keeps relationships shallow, right? And it means that they don't go anywhere. They become fraught and difficult. Another thing I see with avoidant people around boundaries is that they have walls. They don't have boundaries in relationship. They're like, this thing can never happen, black and white. Yeah. They don't have boundaries, and they often don't speak up if their boundaries are crossed, but they feel angry about it, but they don't speak up. And this is to do with the struggles with communication. Yeah. And I think one of the deeper things that's kind of coming to me now, I was reading through a testimonial sheet, the enrollment sheet for one of my programs last year. A lot of avoidant men said in relationship, they don't believe that anyone's going to care about how they feel. I'll say that again. Avoidant men deeply feel that no one's going to care about how they feel or what's going on in their lives. So they don't share those things. So this is why in relationship, it can feel quite shallow, because he's not sharing how he's feeling or going deep into things, because he doesn't think that anyone would care, because that's been his experience of his life, or that's the experience he feels he's had through life. So all this counts to having this really difficult relationships that just don't really go anywhere. They're fraught with stress, anxiety, arguments, disconnection, blame, shame, all these things. And I say that as someone who's been in those relationships. A little study here. Studies have indicated that avoidantly attached individuals are more likely to engage in the phantom X relationship, right? Where they keep past partners in mind as an escape route from current commitment. Very interesting, that, right? They have this kind of phantom idea. I see this in men who have been in breakups as well. Like, oh man, if I could just get that ex back together, we could be great, we could be happy. And it's all bullshit. But it's this some way of like keeping themselves in this loop of pain in many ways, or like it's safe at that distance because they're not here. So how does avoidant attachment affect dating? It's going to be a lot like the relationship stuff, but just a little bit more nuanced, right? So the avoidance of emotional depth causes a struggle in early stage of relationships, right? Because if things will go really slow, avoidant people will slow things down. Put my hand up, did that so many times. Slowing things down. Let's not let this go too quickly. Yeah, I don't want to have to be feeling too much too quickly, and like strategically doing that. Slowing things down. It might be cancelling dates in between, making it long periods between seeing each other. It can even be prioritizing booty calls over like actual dates where you talk. Yeah. People who are avoidant can often be very charismatic, as I said before, and they can change topic and they can be very fun in a very light-hearted and easy way. And that's their way of avoiding emotional depth as well. One of the pains that they experience, it's really hard because I feel like I'm really recovering from my avoidance, is like seeing dating as this kind of mirror for their childhood wounds. Yeah. Because as I said before, avoidant people and anxious people are drawn together like magnets. And I say magnets because it's like, imagine when you're on a dating app, you're swiping all these people, and then you go on dates with them, for example, and then you're only attracted generally, right, to the people who will cause you the pain, right? So if you're anxious and you listen to this, your mind, your body, your nervous system chooses to be attracted to avoidant people. And it's like a cruel joke of humanity in many ways, right? The people that are going to cause you the most pain because it's the most difficult for you to be in a relationship, you are drawn to them right? This is how our childhood wounds move. And as I said, I really believe it's to help us heal them, because if we can heal them, then we can move forward, we can expand, we can self-actualize. But for avoidant people, dating can often feel really painful because it just puts a mirror up to their wounds. So they're going to be really avoidant of dating. I've had clients who just don't want to date, just want to avoid it. They want to just, stay at home and do fuck all, or, do their thing, work a lot. A lot of high flying men that I work with, a lot of like kind of like heads of and C-suites and founders of tech companies or serial entrepreneurs. They use work as a way to avoid the dating. I'm too busy, too busy with work. I've got this project to do. I've got too much to do, right? I've mentioned the one about fixating on problems. That's something that comes up a lot in dating, early stages. And it can be a way of, especially on dating apps now, because you can see so much on dating apps. You can see a person, you can see them in pictures, what they're doing. You can fixate on one little sentence, be like, oh, they're not for me. Yeah. Or you can go on a date or two with someone and be like, the way the drink they chose, the way they walked or whatever. You can discount people very quickly. This is the kind of throwaway nature of online dating. The fear of rejection comes up in dating a lot as well. This avoidance of not wanting to be rejected or being sensitive to it. Delaying commitment. I've kind of mentioned this is like elongating out the dating. So it takes really long time. And then there's another piece which is around misinterpreting interest. This is the interesting one for avoidant people, is they will often assume that people aren't interested in them, right? Because then they don't have to feel rejection, right? It's this kind of rejection piece again, yeah? And again, this fear of dependency, always coming up to fear of dependency. So the next one I'm going to talk about is how it affects intimacy. Avoidant people often have a lot of difficulty with physical affection, particularly public displays of affection, PDAs. I used to have a long conversation with my ex-partners about PDAs and like hating holding hands in public. I used to hate holding hands in public. It made me feel so uncomfortable. It still occurs. I still feel like, there's initial why do I want to, I have excuses in my head like, my hand is cold. I need it in my pocket. Or I need my hand to be free or whatever. Like you just notice these thoughts. I need my hand to be free. Or I need to get something suddenly to let go of the hand. It's almost unconscious that it happens. It's like automatic, as if you are being controlled by something else, right? If you're listening to this and you're avoidant man, you've had this experience. Or someone hugs you and you feel like you freeze and you get all tense and weird. I've seen that. I've hugged people and they've done that to me too. It's this uncomfortability with physical affection, right? Hugging, cuddling, kissing, all those little things, even down to sending sweet messages and expressing love. That's the kind of verbal affection. Something that avoidant men always struggle with is verbal affection and reassurance and stuff like that, right? And feel really uncomfortable with those things. And there's a point of there because it's something I was thinking about, like lying. People often associate lying with avoidant men. And I find the reason why avoidant men lie isn't for meanness or cruelness, it's because they want to avoid the conflict. They want to avoid the emotional reaction of their partner if they tell the truth, because they feel that's too much for them to handle, which is also related to they want to avoid having to feel any shame if they've done any wrongdoing. So lying is a way to avoid shame, right? I'm not sure why that came up there, but I think it's something that comes up quite a bit. Again, prefacing this with, it's not to say that only avoidant men lie. That's not true. Avoidant women lie for very different reasons. To keep love, actually. That's one of the ways I've seen it in my clients, their partners lying to keep the love, keep the relationship. So we're still in intimacy. So that's moving away from physical touch, but then also into words, saying I love you, I care about you, I want to be with you. All these things can be a struggle for avoidant man because the emotional side is difficult. And also for me, it used to be like, I used to feel that if I said I love you, why do I need to keep telling you I loved you? I told you yesterday, like, it. Why do I need to say it again? I'm just telling you a thing I said yesterday. I wouldn't keep telling you the sun's going to rise this morning kind of thing. It felt really tiresome to me, especially. And that's something I have to still watch out for, to be honest, and make sure like I'm saying that, because I know it's important to say. Reassurance as well can feel uncomfortable. And then there's also the piece about intimacy, closeness in the future, as I've mentioned before, because it's to do with commitment and also being their word. I think something that comes up for avoidant men is like, if I say something today, I need to mean it forever. You know, if I say, I want to move in with you, I need to mean this forever. I need to be 100% sure that I'm saying that, right? So still inside of avoidant attachment in intimacy, sexual avoidance. This might find the face of what a lot of us think about avoidant men, because we often think of them just wanting sex, but this also is a way for avoidant men to remove themselves from emotional spaces, especially if their relationship, their partners are, you know, relate sex and emotion together. They can use avoiding of sex as a way to, you know, stay in their safe, independent feeling, right, where they can self-regulate. There's an emotional side of intimacy, which is really obvious that avoidant men move away from. They really struggle from, because of the emotional stunting of their capacity and their expression and so forth. So when it comes to emotional intimacy, they don't want to get involved in that. They want to stay away from that, want to keep it light and shallow, as we've said before. But often what they don't realize is that when we're in a relationship, often emotional intimacy is really important for sexual intimacy. So if there's a lack of emotional intimacy, the sex can feel dry and mechanical, or just doesn't happen at all, right? So that starts to happen, this loss of sexual intimacy. And what I notice with avoidant men is that when they constantly feel like they're in conflict and they feel isolated, they don't want to have sex. Yeah, they just want to stay away from it because it feels too stressful. Of being close with their partner physically, it brings up a lot of the stress of the conflict that hasn't been resolved, or they're annoyed about, or they're frustrated with, what they can't really voice and express. You know, this fear of like not being able to say what they want to say and express that. So generally, for avoidant men, it's this feeling of intimacy is unsafe, right? Closeness is unsafe. We can relate this to avoidance. We can relate this to also the socialization of men, around their emotions and being weak if they show emotion, and they're nurturing and caring and stuff like that. Right, all these things are linked. So there's like the why, the how and why, what it looks like in the various areas of dating, relationship, and intimacy. Now, what can you do about it? Now, there's a lot of steps to this. So I'm going to just kind of roughly talk about what I see. I kind of see it as like a 3-step thing, right? You got to break the habit of avoidance, right? You got to break the habit. You got to get to understand why. And you've got to start to put what I call stoppers into some of the actions. You've got to be really clear, like, when does my avoidance come up? What happens? What do I do? All that kind of jazz, right? You've got to look at the emotional stuff underneath. And then the second step I see is cultivating trust, both in ourselves or in a relationship if we're in one. Developing deeper presence to be with our own emotions, be with our partner's emotions, and also expand our emotional capacity and range. Right. And that can be through small like actions. That can be through doing thick practices. Like I like breath work and I like embodiment practices and so forth when I do that. So we can learn to be with the vulnerability and the strengthened relationship. Right. And then leading and deepening intimacy, leading love and deepening intimacy. Really important. Right. Because that's the thing we move away from. Ultimately, you want to look and go, where am I resistant? Resistance is your guide. What makes me feel uncomfortable? I need to lean into this. So really, you know, it's like if you're at work and you are uncomfortable with presentations, you'd be like, well, I'm going to start doing more presentations, or I do mini presentations, or I practice them so that I get better and better and better. And this is the same with avoidance, right? And it can be harder because it's really deep rooted. It comes from this childhood of feeling not seen and neglected, right? We have to learn to be with discomfort. That's a really important avoidant thing. Have to learn to be with the discomfort, the uncomfortability of the emotions, the feelings, the connection, the intimacy, right? But you can't, I find with men, is you can't just like go all in, because it kind of blows your nervous system a bit. It's like, it's overwhelming. It's too much, right? It's a too big experience and can actually create like an experience of like, oh, that's still dangerous or more dangerous than I thought. So you've got to cultivate all these things, right? And you've got to practice the kind of secure behaviors, you know, which is moving towards connection, moving towards intimacy, communicating, healthy boundaries, you know, expressing boundaries, expressing needs, allowing for interdependence, right? all those things, as well as conflict. So there's a lot of work there to do, right? I'm not going to explain it all because I don't need to, because what you need to be doing needs to be done. It's an embodied practice. It's not something you can do in your head. Like listen to this podcast. I find a lot with men is they want to consume everything mentally before they do anything. And actually that is counterproductive. You need to consume a little bit of information and then take action consistently, right? And this is why I built the program that I talked about earlier, right? Breaking the chains of avoidance, because inside the container of the program, I take you step by step through a lot of those 3-step processes with all the little bits in between, but you don't do it alone in the comfort of your bedroom, right? With no one around you. You do it with a group of men, right? Who are also in it together, right? So because you practice all these bits about emotional expression, being with uncomfortable emotions, like self-reflection, increasing self-awareness, expressing vulnerability. You practice those things over 12 weeks so that in a relational setting, which it is, when you're in a group of, 5, 10, 15 men, it's a relational setting because you have a relationship. It might not be a sexual relationship, but you have a relationship, and it can be an intimate relationship, not sexual, intimate, close relationship. And then you can start to rewrite some of these kind of patterns, whether it's the patterns of the nervous system, patterns of the mind, patterns of reacting, because you get opportunity to shift and change. And it's why I do this work. I think it's really magical to do in group, right? You can do this work with your partner. The problem you have is that your partner is also reactive and they're going to react to you in ways, right? And that can be really difficult. So this is why I create Breaking the Chains of Avoidance, because I saw this is the importance of this work and doing it with people, with other men who are in the position of you, who are motivated like you to make a change because you're done with the pain, right? So like I said, I take men through these different steps that I've talked about, all the bits to do the healing. We get a clear understanding of where your avoidance has come from, what happened, what you need to do about it, right? And we set up to win. I'm setting you up to win, right? Because doing this alone can take years. It can take absolute years, and I'm testament to it. It took me years to really do a lot of this, right? Because I was doing it on my own. I was doing it haphazardly. I wasn't getting like feedback from people, So again, that's why I built this program, to support this. And like last time round, I just saw so many huge transformations from men in terms of their emotional capacity, their ability to create relationships, their ability to like deal with conflict, right? To deal with the conflict in their relationships. They leant towards conflict. People's relationships shifted. There are men who had been avoiding dating for a long time that leant back into dating and saw the beauty and joy in that. There were men who had become estranged from friends and family because they was assuming they were going to get rejected or going to be ignored, that they leaned into those friendships and really enjoyed it. And there was men who rekindled old relationships with partners. There were men who also got into new relationships, new beautiful relationships. So I know this shit works. Yeah, because I've been my own test dummy on it first of all. And I've just tried to condense the best of what I know into 12 weeks, into 3 months to support men, right? Because this can radically change your life. I actually believe this work can radically change the world. I believe when men get more in touch with their feelings and their leadership and their awareness and their ability to love, they make better human beings all round. They got more compassion, more empathy, more self-awareness. They build better teams, all these things, right? So if this sounds tempting to you, actually this should sound really fucking tempting to you, there's a wait list in the description, as I mentioned before. Join that wait list and you're going to get a discount off the full price when it launches. If you don't join the wait list and you try and leave it till late, which is a very common avoidant man thing to do, you might just miss out. And you'll miss out on this, right? And I'm not sure when I'm going to run this again. It's a really beautiful program, and it's not available as a self-serve program. This is a live online program. All the sessions are recorded, really important. All the sessions are recorded. So if you miss something or you got to be away for 2 weeks, it gets recorded. But there's a beautiful community of men that I bring together for this, right? Men who listen to this podcast who are like in growth, about life, about changing, right? About being better men. So if that sounds like you, and that sounds like something you want in your life, you want those relationships to be better, you're sick and tired of unhappy relationships, you're sick and tired of feeling lonely, you're sick and tired of fearing commitment and not being able to express your emotions and needs in your relationship, then put yourself on the wait list. Yeah, I'm really expecting this to sell out because, this is magic, and I'm putting a lot more behind it. Last year I did it was a bit of a pilot to see how it worked, and I've refined a lot of details from that. So you got a lot from this podcast about avoidance. Take it away, do something with it. Don't just continue in this painful way of being. I know the pain. Don't. It doesn't have to be this way. It can change. You can have something different for your children, especially for those of you that got kids, right, or want to have kids. Don't just keep kicking it down the road and going, I'll do it later, because later becomes never, and before you know it, it's not possible. It's too late. It's too ingrained. It's too deeply ingrained in your life. You'll be able to change it, but it'll just take 3 or 4 times longer, or take 4 or 5 times more effort. So this program's here to help you. Hopefully this information has served you. As always, I'm here to help. You can find me on Instagram at @theauthenticman_. Now I'm doing a lot more on YouTube, so you can find all the videos for the podcast on YouTube, plus some short clips that I do during the week. And I'm also going to be posting more videos that are just like videos just for YouTube. So go and, look at YouTube, subscribe on YouTube and so forth as well. But remember, waitlist down below, starts on 22nd of April. It's all online, so you can join from wherever you are in the world as well. And it's all the sessions we recorded. Wonderful. Great having you here. Great talking to you. Reach out to me on Instagram as well for have a chat. Always like to talk to people. I'll leave you for now. Ciao, ciao.